showed that women who took hormonal birth control were more likely to develop certain autoimmune diseases, including being 35% more likely to develop multiple sclerosis, 50% more likely to develop lupus, and up to 3 times more likely to develop Crohn's disease when compared with women who never took the pill.
Women are currently being erased in culture, and I want to amplify their voices and share their stories. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to This is a Woman podcast. I'm so excited for you guys to all listen to this episode. Please listen to it all the way through. We dive into the truth behind hormonal birth control, how hormonal birth control can impact your day-to-day life, how the female body functions and the beauty within that, as well as why holding women illiterate of their bodies is a systematic act of disempowerment. So we really dive into how the female body works when it comes to birth control, when it comes to sex. We are going to be talking about that, to talk about the entire way the female body works and the harms that are resulted because we don't understand how our body works. So I brought in an expert to talk about this stuff, Katie E. Vidmar, and I'm going to read you guys all her bio because this is a lot of stuff we're talking about, and I want you guys to realize that she truly is an expert on this issue. So Katie Vidmar is a body literacy and fertility awareness educator from North Dakota. Katie is the creator of Elevate, a training designed for federally qualified and nonprofit medical centers, including pregnancy resource centers, to empower them with education and immediately actionable tools to bring the power of holistic women's health education to their community. Katie holds a BS in pre-medicine and liberal arts from the University of North Dakota and a master's in Theological Studies in Biotechnology and Ethics from the Pontifical John Paul II Institute. She's trained in the Billings Ovulation Method and has acted as an ENDOW facilitator, which is educating on the nature of dignity of women. She brings 20 plus years of experience mentoring young women and 10 plus years experience serving in the pregnancy medical clinic movement. She enjoys helping things grow, including her jungle of houseplants, sourdough starter, and kombucha. And last but not least, her husband and 6 children. I'm so excited for you guys to all hear about Katie, and we're going to talk about lots of resources, websites, books during this podcast. So look at the show notes for links to everything and all the information. But with that, Katie, thank you so much for joining us on This is a Woman podcast. We are so excited to have you on. I loved our conversation that me and you got to have a couple weeks ago in Texas, and I knew all my followers had to also hear everything that you had to say. Just phenomenal stuff. But let's just dive right into it. Women don't know how our bodies work. We don't know how our bodies work. That leads us to putting things in our bodies, such as birth control, and we don't realize the impacts of that. You have so much to say on that. So welcome to the podcast, and maybe just dive in on your whole meat Lego talk that we've talked about.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Sophia. I am really excited to share with you and your audience today. I am a body literacy and fertility awareness educator, and I'm mother of 6. I have 4 daughters, and I just love women and am really passionate about really empowering informed consent in women's healthcare and then just in our lives in general. I love the author and influencer Lisa Hendrickson Jack. Are you familiar with Lisa? She wrote the book, The Fifth Vital Sign, you see on the bookshelf behind me. And in that book, she has a quote that I think is really jarring. She talks about how many people in the world are illiterate. They can't read. And that to hold a population illiterate is a systematic act of disempowerment. If you can't read, you are all the more easy to use, abuse, and control. And then Lisa goes on to say, so what does it mean, friends, that we live in a culture that tends to hold women illiterate of their bodies? And is this not also an act of systematic disempowerment? I remember reading that a couple of summers ago and just having this like wave of emotion come over me. Just that sense of injustice, that this knowledge that is every woman's birthright isn't shared. And I think there's many reasons why this is the case. Um, and maybe you want to go down some conspiracy theory rabbit holes about that. But I think there's actually probably some pretty just like banal market driven reasons why this is the case. Yeah, but I see over and over again when I have the privilege of being the one who gets to share with a woman about her incredible design and how good her body is. There's like this double movement inside women. They're like, oh my goodness, this is so amazing. And then they're simultaneously enraged. They're like, why hasn't anyone told me this before?
Yes. No, and that's like you said, why has no one told us this before? We go through the learning that all of a sudden we're going to have a menstrual cycle and that's going to be once a week, and we're told it's really going to suck. And then we get told it's just so we can eventually get pregnant one day. And I feel like quite often that's the basics of what we're told. Hey, this once a week, this is really going to suck. It's going to hurt. It's going to be a mess. And that's what you just have to deal with for a long time, not understanding why our body's fully doing that, not understanding what's going on in our body during that, not understanding that maybe it shouldn't be this painful process. And that I think that really leads us to not caring for our bodies or how our bodies work, or not respecting how our bodies work. And so I guess if you want to just like dive into
Absolutely.
all of that.
I think that, I mean, I know I listened to your first podcast episode and know that you're really like wanting to share biblical values through your podcast, which I think is really beautiful. I think that sharing the truth of the female design is one of the most disarming ways of preaching the gospel in these like strange times that we live in it's like a more secular post-Christian society. Because if a woman can see that her body is made in a way that is intelligent and beautiful and makes sense, it's that much easier for her to believe that the one who made her is good. But if she believes that her body is somehow against her, or that it does these arbitrary things, it seems arbitrary to her because she's never been taught the why behind what her beautiful, intelligent body is doing, then it makes it harder to believe in a God who loves you also. So I'm excited. I feel like it's a way of like undercover evangelization because yeah, the truth is one. And so and we all have bodies. So let's just start with what we have in common.
Absolutely. And because our bodies are so intricate. And that does go back to we have a creator that made us perfectly, and that didn't make mistakes when he made us. The way our bodies function, he made that by design. And so why don't we just, I guess, dive into that? A woman's body, what's going on with
Yeah,
it?
I would love to
What's
share.
on all of
Um,
that.
yeah, I mean, we know that we're made in the image and likeness of God, right? And that in the next breath in Genesis, it says that we're then made male and female. So there's something intimately connected with our being made in the image of God and being male and female. And I think it has to do with the order of love. We believe as Christians that God is a Trinity, right? That God the Father pours himself out in love to God the Son. And God the Son receives that love and gives a total gift of himself back in return. And that love is so real, it becomes another person, the Holy Spirit. And so if you think about a family, there's an echo there that that the husband pours himself out in love to his wife, and his bride receives that love and gives a total gift of herself back to her spouse, and that love is so real and tangible that 9 months later you have to give it a name. It becomes another person. And so there's this beautiful way as women that we participate in this giving and receiving of love, and we see that embodied. One of my favorite things is to talk to women about how our bodies are symbolic. that we're not just learning facts about the 4 phases of the menstrual cycle, and here's what estrogen does, and here's what progesterone does, in this very mechanical, almost materialistic way, but that when we see the truth of our physiology, it reveals really profound truths about our nature as women made in the image of God. Would you like to hear some of those facts, Sophia?
Yes, let's dive right into that.
Okay, so I used to think that it was just this race of like which sperm is going to get there first to the egg, right? Like who is the strongest and most athletic, and he would charge in there and force his way in, right? and there is some truth to that. Of the 700,000 sperm that are released with every ejaculation, only about 200 actually make it to the egg.
Oh, wow.
And some of them, like up to 40%, are defective. They're like swimming in circles, or they're not carrying the right number of chromosomes, and they get trapped in the cervix by the woman's cervical mucus. There's something called the L type mucus. Someone joked it's L for loser. I don't think that's true. I think L stands for something else. But it does, it like holds back the sperm that are not worthy of reaching the egg. And then as we move to like the middle third of the cervix, we create a type of cervical fluid that nurtures the sperm. It gives them a cozy home, lots of sugars to eat, and sperm can live there for up to 5 days, hang out, waiting for that moment of ovulation. And then the top third of the cervix, there's a type of cervical fluid that at the moment of ovulation, it pushes the sperm up into the uterus, travels down the fallopian tubes. Some of the guys go down the wrong side. So in the end, only about 200 finally make it to their destination. Then what we have found is that the egg releases a chemoattractant. She chooses one sperm. She calls to that one sperm and invites him in, which I think is so amazing.
Yeah.
And yeah, really flips the narrative on what that whole process is about and what is the symbolic quality of knowing this physiological fact. I think it's that it can reveal to us as women that our bodies are for ourselves. And that we decide on our terms who we share our bodies with and when. So there's one bomb.
Yeah, no, that's, I mean, like you said at the start, I mean, so often, I mean, I even hear guys making jokes all the time. I was the strongest swimmer, and that's how
Right?
and so that's what we hear, and we're not realizing the process that's being done, and that it is our own bodies releasing the egg and choosing that sperm out of the 200 or so that make it. It's,
Yeah.
again,
So
it just
it's
goes.
both and, right?
Mhm.
They do have to. They do have to pass a test.
Yes.
Right? But that's not all. That's not the end of the story.
Right. Okay, so
Yeah.
the next thing that you said, the next truth bomb.
Yeah. You ready for the next one? Okay, so this one has to do with our experience of pleasure as women. So if you've heard of a woman achieving like a full cervical orgasm, what happens in her womb is that her womb actually starts to contract. If you think about it, kind of shaped like a pear, and the cervix is at the bottom. Her womb starts to contract similarly to how it does when she's in labor. But it's at this moment of like peak connection, bonding, and pleasure for the woman. And when her womb contracts, what happens is her cervix actually slightly dilates. And so, what that means is that at the moment of peak pleasure is the moment when this act of intimacy is most likely to result in pregnancy. So, physiologically, bonding and baby making are one thing in the woman's body, and that you can't separate them physiologically without losing both. So this is a way of kind of entering into a conversation a little bit about some of the unintended consequences of hormonal contraception. In order for a woman's arousal pattern to happen, she has to have a healthy hormonal blueprint. She has to be producing hormones at adequate levels in order for all of her internal tissues to become engorged. A woman has just as much erectile tissue as a man does. It's just internal to our bodies. Yeah, it's amazing. It takes a woman like 35 to 45 minutes of being carefully tended to in order for that to happen and in order for her womb to start pulsing in this way. So what happens if we disrupt her hormonal blueprint on purpose? You're a smart woman, Sophia. I think you can guess what happens. We have a gland right at the bottom of our vaginal canal called the Bartholin gland. And it's a hormone dependent gland, and it's actually dependent on testosterone levels. And pill taking women or women with a hormonal IUD or an implant, their testosterone levels can fall by 69%, which is very significant. And it can fall so low that her Bartholin gland can't release anything. So she doesn't have this natural lubrication that comes with arousal fluid. And then penetration hurts. And then she braces against that pain. And then she ends up with like deep pelvic floor problems. And she's definitely not experiencing an orgasm. So we can put this study in the show notes, but 38% of pill-taking women report some form of sexual dysfunction. And many of them don't connect it back to hormonal contraception. So just one of the unintended consequences that come with contraception.
Well, and then it's so interesting how you talk about like you said, what causes this birth control, taking this pill can mess up the sexual pleasure that happens, but then going back to not knowing that whole process you explained, how our bodies work when you're doing that. That's why we so often separate sex from baby making. But our
Absolutely.
bodies aren't. And so
Right.
we are in a time where it just, I mean, I think sex has just overtaken society, and it's just the casual thing to do all the time. People are just talking about it all the time. You see it on TV, it's on all the movies. And that separates in our minds. It's just, okay, this is an act of pleasure, but our bodies aren't just taking that as an act of pleasure. Our bodies
Right.
understand that that is baby making. You cannot physiologically separate the two. But then
Right.
also the harm the pill creates in that process and the way your body functions in that process. It's just
Yeah.
so intertwined. And
It
like you said,
is.
aren't connected.
Everything is connected. If any of your listeners want a deeper dive, I really recommend Mary Harrington's book, Feminism Against Progress. She's fascinating, really interesting to read. And she has a whole chapter towards the end of her book called Rewilding Your Sex Life. And I love that she comes at the conversation from making this connection with conservation efforts. She talks about like the reintroduction of wolves into Yellowstone National Park and the great benefits that that had on the entire ecosystem to reintroduce this apex predator, this risk into the system. And she draws out how because the elk populations were kept down, the elk weren't eating as much vegetation. It allowed the trees to establish along the edge of a river, and it like literally changed the course of a river to reintroduce these wolves. Really cool. So by analogy, she says, getting pregnant is dangerous. But what would it be like to reintroduce this risk into the equation of our lovemaking? And then she talks about how women that do this report so much greater satisfaction in their experiences. They tend to be monogamous experiences, interestingly. And that women who are choosing to be promiscuous, it's very ironic that the pill that was supposed to set us free so that we could be just as promiscuous as men without the consequences of pregnancy has the effect of making us not desire to make love at all.
Wow.
And she has some like really interesting stats looking at the percentage of women that say that their sex is pleasurable when they're having multiple partners, hooking up with Tinder. And the answer is not very many. I wish I had this stat ingrained in my brain, but maybe we'll put it in the show notes.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's incredible that, yeah, if we're really honest and are willing to really be students of reality and be clear-eyed about our experience, we can come to these conclusions on our own. This is actually not good for me.
Absolutely. And like you said, this birth control pill that was supposed to set women free to have all these sexual pleasures without the consequence of pregnancy, there might be some women listening that say, well, no, I'm not sleeping around. I'm not doing that. I'm taking the birth control pill because I have really heavy periods. So everything
Yeah.
that you guys just said, it's not going to affect me because that's not what I'm doing right now. But there is still major consequences. So maybe we can touch on that.
Yeah, I would love to speak into that. This is an area of a lot of passion for me because many women feel that they don't have anywhere to turn, that they're stuck between a rock and a hard place, menstrual distress, or hormonal contraceptives, which effectively treat their symptoms. We have to be clear about that. Many women experience a lot of relief, and I'm all for women not suffering, right? It's just, yeah, another analogy from Lisa Hendrickson Jack's book. She says, imagine that you're in a room and there's a fire alarm going off. And that's what our symptoms are like. So if you're a woman who has really painful bleeds, for example, that bleed is a symptom of an underlying condition. It's like an alarm going off saying, hey, something's up in your body. Let's check this out. And what hormonal contraceptives do effectively is they go and turn off the alarm, but they do not address the underlying fire. So, is there some good being realized? Yes. Is it good that this woman no longer has a painful bleed? Absolutely. But what happens when that young woman finds Mr. Right and wants to get married? And that's often where I come in. I work with a lot of engaged couples that are preparing for marriage, and I work with a lot of women that are stepping down from their hormonal contraceptive that they've taken for therapeutic reasons. And there is a whole branch of medicine that is up and coming and emerging called restorative reproductive medicine. I would encourage your listeners to learn more about it. The Institute for Restorative Reproductive Medicine has a lot of great information, as well as the organization Facts About Fertility. They were also with us in Texas if you had a chance to visit with them, Sophia. They're amazing. So, if you think about cardiac care in the 1950s, it was a lot of hand-holding and morphine. Like, we treated the symptoms, but we didn't do a lot for the underlying condition. And so what restorative reproductive medicine does is try to initiate that same watershed change in how we treat women's health. That there are ways and there are physicians skilled in treating underlying conditions. And it's more work. We are in a instant gratification culture. So if I can just pop a pill and my period pain goes away, hallelujah, moving on, right? So there's more to it. It involves cycle tracking. It involves going in for blood draws to look at hormone levels at different times in your cycle. It can involve ultrasounds, both of what's happening in your womb as well as what's happening in your ovaries. So it's an investment of time and resources. But if you're wanting to really heal and put those underlying conditions to rest for good. It's the way.
Well, and not only is it, you mentioned it is work, and it is work to do all that, but you either have to do that work and heal your body from the start, or once you hit that point where you do get married and decide you want to start having children, you're going to have to put in the work then. And at that
Right.
point, I don't want to say it's too late, but it's a lot more difficult when you've been, like you said, when you take that birth control pill to cover up period pain, it does cover up the period pain, but it's not, I wouldn't say it's leaving your body hormonally where you're at with all your already underlying issues. It's creating more issues hormonally. Your body's not functioning normally. And maybe if you can touch on this real quick, I have talked with women that are like, yeah, I take the pill, gets rid of my period pain. I get my period once a month like I'm supposed to, all that. They don't even realize that that's not a real period that's happening.
That's right.
And so,
Yeah, a true menstruation only follows ovulation. And so, what the pill does is effectively interrupt your hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis. It's an endocrine disruptor. So, we are disrupting that brain ovarian communication on purpose, which effectively suppresses our cycle. Interestingly, when the pill was first created, when they were first rolling it out and testing it, they didn't have those placebo pills. They just gave the woman the synthetic hormones and she stopped bleeding altogether. And it freaked women out. And so, in order to get the woman feeling good about taking it, and they knew if they could convince American women to take it, they could convince the rest of the world also. So, they added those placebo pills in basically to make us feel better about it. So they'll tell women this will help you regulate your period. And I say the word regulate in air quotes because you're not really having a true menstruation. What you're having is what we technically call a withdrawal bleed on those days that you either skip your pills or take those sugar pills that they put in your pack. And I think it's really important to be clear-eyed about this. I think it's important that people know that myself and others like me are not trying to take away anyone's access to hormonal contraceptives. I just want women to go in with a truly informed consent, and I don't see that happening.
absolutely. It's not like, again, you it's so easy to go in and say, I have a heavy period, I'm sexually active, can I get the birth control pill? But now that's turned into, I think a lot of women are starting to wake up. We're seeing kind of this movement happening of women saying, oh wait, this pill isn't great for us and it's causing issues. It's affecting, again, either your sex life, it's affecting your hormones, it's affecting basically day to day everything. And maybe we can dive into some of the day to day things it affects.
Yes.
But we also, so I want to dive into that, but I also want to touch on, now you're seeing people use other forms of birth control, whether it's the IUD or the different things, thinking, okay, well, this is better. And so, but there's
Mm.
still some concerns. And again, going back to, we're not saying take away anyone's access to birth control. We're not saying you're a horrible person, you should, if you're on birth control. None of that. It just, you should have informed consent about what you're doing to your body. But so I guess if we can dive into the other day-to-day things the birth control pill affects, and maybe also some of the other side effects and harms of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. So I think what we want to keep in mind is like, let's go back to just a basic definition of what a hormone is. So a hormone is a chemical messenger that can speak its message to any cell in your body that has a receptor for that hormone. So it's kind of like a loudspeaker. It's a way of coordinating your body, all of your body systems to do the same thing all together. Like imagine what a disaster it would be if it was time to go to bed, but your like biochemistry, because of what your hormones were doing, was telling you, no, I'm actually being chased by a bear. It like, just silly example, but it gives you an idea of how hormones help everything to sync together. So when we talk about our hormones that are the main players in our reproductive system, we need to keep in mind that estrogen doesn't just affect my lady parts. Estrogen affects every cell in our bodies. So day to day, when we're disrupting our hormone levels on purpose, we can expect that to have systemic effects. And I mean, I have a whole laundry list of things we could talk through, Sophia. I think, like, people think of the catastrophic side effects of hormonal contraceptives, like a blood clot that will kill you or a stroke, right? And those are very rare. But the things that affect our quality of life, I think first and foremost, I would want to talk about mental health. Yes, 50% of women taking hormonal contraceptives report some kind of mood related side effect, whether that's anxiety, depression, some kind of mood change. Some women just talk about feeling flat, like they're not really sad, but they're also not really happy. And the things that brought them pleasure, the music they used to like to listen to, just like doesn't make them come alive in the same way. And that makes sense given what we're doing to manipulate her hormones as we suppress her ovaries. We've already talked about libido and all of that. Many women experience weight gain because it turns out that both estrogen and progesterone regulate our metabolism. And so many women will experience some type of weight gain. For some women, it's extreme. For others, it's just like an extra 5 to 7 pounds that just won't go away. But that's bothersome. I should be able to have seconds and a piece of dark chocolate. Dang it. So there's that. There's a really fascinating book called This Is Your Brain on Birth Control by a brilliant woman named Sarah Hill. She has a PhD, and her area of expertise is evolutionary psychology. And she bends over backwards to be really balanced in this book. She's really afraid of being painted as anti-birth control. But she's squarely on the side of informed consent, and so I call her an ally. And she unpacks some really interesting things. There's a TED Talk out there you can find on YouTube pretty easily, that the pill transforms a woman's stress response. So even though she might not feel stressed, her biochemical blueprint in her body has spiked cortisol levels, which is affecting all of the things. So that's a fascinating consideration. She also does a deep dive into way that the pill can change both who we are attracted to as women and who we attract. So if hormones are biochemical messengers within my body, pheromones are biochemical messengers between bodies. So some really interesting studies done that show that men are more attracted to naturally cycling women than women who are taking hormonal contraceptives. Super interesting. The way that they measured this, unfortunately, involved strippers and tips. But they found that the strippers who were cycling naturally got more overall tips than the strippers who had an impaired cycle.
Wow.
You can take that for what it's worth.
Yeah. Well, I think that plays such a role into, you get on birth control, you're on birth control for years, you start dating someone, you really like them, get married to them, you're married to them maybe for 2 or 3, 4 years, decide, okay, time to get off birth control to start having children. And I can't even imagine the effect that could play on a marriage where all of a sudden
Yeah.
you were attracted to someone, they were attracted to you when your body was on this hormone disruptor, on this pheromone disruptor, and
Right.
now you're off of it. And I don't know if we've necessarily seen the full effects or have great data of that yet, but I can only imagine how that has to play a role.
Yes, you're right. And Sarah Hill talks about that in her book, that often women will experience that they're no longer attracted to the man that they met while they were taking the pill.
Wow.
And again, she's like, that doesn't mean you shouldn't take it. It just means have clear eyes.
Yes,
So
be informed.
that's right. Be informed, people. Yeah. I mean, just going down the laundry list, the pill is also related to autoimmune disorders.
Mm,
Estrogen may be the underlying link between various autoimmune disorders. 80% of human beings with autoimmune disorders are women,
mm,
which is a really interesting fact that I uncovered. Um, so, one recent study that I found showed that women who took hormonal birth control were more likely to develop certain autoimmune diseases, including being 35% more likely to develop multiple sclerosis, 50% more likely to develop lupus, and up to 3 times more likely to develop Crohn's disease when compared with women who never took the pill.
mm.
So, pay attention. We also know that our gut health is affected by hormonal contraception. Often, women who are coming off of the pill have a lot of work to do in healing their gut.
Mm,
And we know there's this huge connection between gut health and brain health. Um, a lot of the serotonin produced in our bodies is actually manufactured in our guts. And so it just, where everything is connected,
mhm,
right? I think it's just important to say that as often as we can, because we live in a culture that tends to have us think about our bodies more like they're machines,
mm,
where our parts only relate externally. And it's just not the case. We're an organic whole.
mhm.
We're not made of meat Legos,
Yes.
which is Mary Harrington's term about how she thinks the culture encourages us to view our bodies
Mm,
with just these interchangeable parts that we can switch in and out, and you can sell them if you want to. And that when we really start to pay attention to our experience, it doesn't correspond.
mhm.
Yeah.
And I think that you and I have chatted about this kind of the erasure of women that we're seeing. I think that leads to because we have this lack of knowledge about our bodies, which I think leads to a lack of respect of our bodies, and which also leads to not cherishing who you are as a woman and how our bodies work. It's very intricate and it can sound very tricky, but I think it's beautiful how perfectly our bodies were designed to work. And when all that goes out the door, there's nothing left that's special about being a woman. There's nothing
Mm-hmm.
when you are just when your body is just a machine, you're not seeing how beautiful it is that we have the ability to create and grow a human being inside of us, and just the day to day how well our body works. And something when you were touching about the gut health and leading to the brain health and all of that being disrupted through this hormonal contraception, I think that can sometimes be hard for people to wrap their minds around. And so when I hear that, I think of if you're tired all the time and you just think, oh, I'm going to have this energy drink or this shot of espresso to get me going through the day, it's no, that's going to help you for an hour. But why am I tired? I'm not tired necessarily because my brain's tired. Am I filling my body with sugar? Am I not sleeping enough? And so on other things, we're able to look and see, okay, what's causing this and backtracking it, but we're not necessarily wired to do that. I think because of just the conversation about hormonal contraception as a society isn't talked about enough. But we're not wired to look back and be like, why am I having these gut health issues? Why am I maybe having this brain fog or brain or mental health issues? And we're not going back to that underlying issue of I'm every single day disrupting my hormones, disrupting how my body's naturally set to work. Um,
Yeah. That's
And
right. It's become like taking a vitamin. Like we just trust it and it feels like really benign. And so we don't even suspect that it could be at the root of some of the other issues that we're having. Again, Mary Harrington, the brilliant Mary Harrington, says that she believes that hormonal contraceptives are the first transhuman intervention, and that they lead the kind of logic that is embraced in the use of hormonal contraceptives, mainly that my body is just sheer material that I can manipulate in whatever way I want to without consequences or unintended side effects. If you buy that, that again, I'm just made of these meat Legos that I can manipulate at will, then you see how that leads directly um, into some of the transgender ideology, transhuman ideology that is all around us. And I say that with a lot of compassion for anyone who is suffering gender dysphoria. I think it's a hard, hard road. What prepubescent girl doesn't feel at some point like, what the hell is going on with my body?
yeah.
So I think there's a lot there, and just want to be really gentle and humble in front of it. What women experience.
No, absolutely. And no 14-year-old girl, 13-year-old girl, 16-year-old girl ever looks in the mirror and is like, my body's perfect. There's nothing I would change.
Right.
Like, we all feel so uncomfortable, and I think it's teaching girls to embrace that you are beautiful, but your body is going through changes, and you're not going to wake up and love your body every day. And that's okay.
Right.
But I
Right.
think learning why those changes are happening, learning how our bodies work, helps us to love and appreciate that those changes are happening and different things. But you're right. I mean, there's not always the time to talk about it, but it is such an important thing to talk about, that these young girls and young boys that are dealing with this gender confusion, whether they are really gender confused or whether they've just been fed a lie, they're not horrible people. They're not these bad people. We don't hate them. If anything, my heart breaks for them, for either the lies they've been fed that they weren't made perfectly, or for the confusion and what they're dealing with. And so you absolutely framed that perfectly, of they're going through their struggles and they just need the truth fed into them. And that all plays back to understanding our bodies and understanding how our bodies work and understanding the differences between males and females. With that, though, I know we have to get wrapping up soon, but we talked, and I would love to have you on again and keep deep diving onto this, but I want to kind of, I guess, just wrap up with, we talked about the hormonal birth control. We talked about how we're not saying take away access, don't go on it, just have the informed consent. Maybe there's someone listening that's saying, wow, I've spent all these years on birth control, now realizing maybe they want to get off of it now that they've been informed on some things, but they're also sexually active and they're okay, but I'm not ready to get pregnant. Say they're married and they're still not ready to get pregnant. How do they track their cycles?
Yeah.
There's the 4 stages in the month, and I don't think most women even realize there's those stages of our cycle. So if we can maybe end, I guess, talking about that.
Yes, absolutely. So if I had to pick a one-stop shop to really get informed, and as like a jumping off point, I would send your listeners to an amazing website called Natural Womanhood. It is chock full of really, really good articles. They are all heavily referenced, peer reviewed. They have a medical board. I really trust their science, and they work really hard to be beyond reproach because they are speaking into such a politically charged topic.
Mm-hmm.
They have some really great basic articles that can give you a great introduction as far as how to, if you're wanting to start tracking your cycle for family planning purposes. They have a great quiz that you can take that can help you decide which fertility awareness method is right for you. There's different methods out there, and they're not all created equal. And some require more effort and some require less effort. Some use technology. Some don't require anything but a piece of paper and some knowledge. And so there's a great quiz on there that can help you land on a method that's right for you. And then I just really encourage people to get with a trained instructor. Also on the Natural Womanhood website is a directory that can help you find a fertility awareness instructor near you. There's a lot of us doing instruction online, and that can be a really great avenue as well to connect with people. We get the best effectiveness ratings for pregnancy prevention using fertility awareness methods when we work with a trained instructor. If you do the DIY method, be prepared for not the stellar results that are possible with fertility awareness. The method that I'm an instructor in is called the Billings Ovulation Method. And their stat says the perfect use rate is a 99% at preventing pregnancy. Well, that came out of communist China in the year 2001 during their one-child policy. And you can bet those women were very motivated to follow the rules perfectly. And their typical use rate is in the lower 90s. It's like 92%. Because a lot of people that use it are married and in a monogamous relationship, and they have a steady income, and they flirt around the edges of their fertile window a little bit more because they're better prepared to deal with an unplanned pregnancy. But I think it's important to realize that these are behavioral methods. So we're not comparing apples to apples when we say it's as effective as an IUD, because an IUD is a set it and forget it form of birth control. And a behavioral method, we have to understand our biology. We have to have a clear shared intention with our sexual partner. And then our behavior together has to match our biology and our intention. And it's only when that Venn diagram comes together that we get those really high effectiveness ratings for fertility awareness. So Natural Womanhood, Facts also has a great directory of fertility awareness instructors. They also have a decision tool that's more designed for clinical use, but it's also really solid. So I would send your listeners there.
Amazing. Perfect. Well, and then I want to open it up if there's any final things on womanhood or anything we've touched on that you want to just speak about or leave the listeners.
Yeah, Sophia, I was just so grateful to meet you in Texas. And when you walked away, I thought to myself this quote. I actually put it on one of my stickers in my booth, and it says, "Wherever there is a generation of young women who know their own dignity, there will be a generation of young men who rise up to win their love." So I saw you walk away and I said, that girl knows her dignity. More Sophia, please.
Oh, that's so sweet. Wow. That's such a powerful quote, though, to know. I mean, just for every woman to hear and know, you don't need to lower your standards. You don't need to lower who you are. You need to, truthfully expect men to rise up to deserve you. And you also have to put in the work to be a great woman, to be a great wife, but you shouldn't have to lower anything about yourself. So,
no,
wow.
Absolutely. No, right. You should say jump and they should say how high.
Yes. Yes. Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Katie. What is the best way, and I'll put it in the show notes as well, but for all of my listeners to learn more about you, find more out about you, social media, website, all of that?
Yeah. My website is www.katievidmar.com. And I am not on social media or Instagram by design.
Smarter than the most of us, honestly, for that. Perfect. All right. Well, I will put that in the show notes so all of you can go check out Katie's website. But Katie, this was so informative. I mean, just from the few conversations we've had, I learned so much every single time. So I'm so grateful for you and would love to have you on again at some point just to keep deep diving into all of this.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sophia.